आज का भारत सिर्फ आगे नहीं बढ़ रहा, भारत खुद को नेक्स्ट लेवल पर ले जा रहा है.
Together with my friend Prime Minister Modi, who I was pleased to see again last night, we took on our bilateral relationship and raised it to its highest level ever.
We need new answers. That's why we are coming to India.
And as a citizen of Nepal, India's closest neighbor, I feel a deep sense of pride and optimism seeing this stride.
Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. US President Donald Trump says he will soon declare the Strait of Hormuz as a US territory, while the USS George Washington has left Vietnam en route to an anticipated Middle East deployment, where it's expected to relieve the USS Abraham Lincoln amid growing concerns over conditions on board. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi says Tehran is continuing talks with Oman on shipping routes in the Strait of Hormuz, but warns that reopening the waterway will depend on the US upholding the MOU signed in June, which is set to expire tomorrow. Yemen's Houthis have launched ballistic missile attacks on the Yemeni government-held city of Marib, causing injuries and damage, as Yemeni government forces said drone strikes killed 3 Houthi fighters near Taiz and a separate strike destroyed a Houthi vehicle in Jabal al-Zuhaib. Israeli forces have killed a Palestinian and wounded 7 others in attacks across the Gaza Strip on Saturday. Israel continues to bombard southern Lebanon, killing at least 11 people in the worst attacks since a US brokered ceasefire back in June, as Israel says 3 soldiers were wounded in a drone attack in Lebanon overnight on Saturday. Colombia's new president has called on United States President Donald Trump to suspend tariffs targeting the Colombia, which is reeling from Monday's 7.4 magnitude earthquake, killing at least 294 people. The Colombian leader has described his 10-minute conversation with President Trump as very friendly. Rescue teams in Indonesia have been searching for survivors of Saturday's major earthquake, which has left at least 47 people dead. As Indonesia's Meteorology and Geophysics Agency stated, the magnitude 7.7 quake struck the island of Flores shortly before 5 a.m. local time and had a depth of 15 kilometers. According to Moroccan security sources cited by Spanish media, that 111 people were blocked trying to make their way to the border on the outskirts of the town of Finidik. Security had been stepped up in the area after the influx and amid suggestions on social media of a second mass crossing attempt this weekend. Now we start this hour with the Middle East. We turn now to critical breakthrough and ongoing standoff in the Persian Gulf, where Iran and Oman have officially reached a landmark agreement on new shipping route map for the vital Strait of Hormuz. According to Iranian state media, weeks of intensive technical negotiations between Tehran and Muscat successfully yielded a framework for safe navigation protocols. However, regional authorities emphasize that while the bilateral mapping deal is a major step forward, a full reopening of the strategic maritime choke point remains strictly hinged on broader geopolitical actions. Tehran maintains that normal commercial transit will not resume until the United States lifts its ongoing naval blockade and halts military threats and addresses the long-standing demands regarding economic sanctions and compensation. The development comes as international energy markets closely monitor the heavily militarized corridor through which a massive share of global seaborne oil and gas passes, while Omani mediators continue diplomatic efforts to bridge the gap. Washington and its regional allies maintain strict enforcement of current security measures. Now we welcome Ambassador Tom Armbruster. He's a former U.S. ambassador to the Marshall Islands and former U.S. Embassy's nuclear affairs officer in Moscow, who joins us live from New York, as well as retired Colonel Bill Putnam. He's a retired U.S. Army colonel and Harvard National Security Fellow, who joins us live from Virginia. Thank you to both our guests for joining us. First, I'd like to go to Ambassador Armbruster for my question. Ambassador, looking at this, can we say it's a de-escalation or an escalation if the breakthrough is reached between Oman and Iran, and we might see this strait opening, but never going back to pre-war conditions?
It's a positive step, but it's really not the step that's crucial to get where we need to go, and that is for the U.S. and Iran to come to an agreement, and then agreements like this, as you mentioned, a technical agreement, where the ships will go, what the prices will be, that kind of thing, that should follow. But if this is done first, that makes the other agreement somewhat easier in the long run. But oil prices haven't changed much on this news, so while it's positive, it's really not the step that's required. And the really big issues, the nuclear issue, for example, is not being talked about much at all right now, which is the more complicated issue and the one that, until there are international atomic energy inspectors on the ground, we're really not going to make much progress on at all. The rhetoric also between the two countries, Iran and the United States, has not been very good. And there's another complicating factor that your other guest, Mr. Putnam, will speak about, I'm sure, and that's the morale of the military. You won't have active military folks criticizing the administration, but we know from reports that conditions are tough and families are kind of at wit's end after 200-day deployment in the Gulf. So that's a complicating factor that President Trump has to deal with. So not a lot has changed, and I think we're probably still in a space where we're not going to see an agreement in the next 1 to 3 months. Congress is out of session, and the rhetoric is simply too heated, and there's still attacks on both sides.
Thank you for sharing that. Building on that, coming back to you, Colonel Putnam. Colonel Putnam, what's your take? Overall, USS Abraham Lincoln also being replaced, is this also an escalation, de-escalation, or even status quo? Is U.S. only trying to replace it because of, all the reports, alleged reports that we are hearing about mental illnesses, everything that has been going on, especially the deteriorating factors even picked up in military reports or military magazines of the USS Abraham Lincoln?
First off, good evening, good morning. It's a pleasure to be on here, and it's always good to be on with Ambassador Armbruster because he's a really good guest.
Thank you.
I think the first thing that we want to highlight is that the rotation of the Abraham Lincoln, which has set a record for a number of days at sea, is not necessarily an abnormality. It's been in longer than we would normally have, and the reason why is because for planners, they didn't expect the conflict to go on for this long. With the George Washington coming, that's part of a normal rotation. I myself, when I deployed to Afghanistan on my second tour, we did 9 straight months there. So it is a normal tour. The second thing I would like to highlight is that when you're in a deployed environment, and especially on a ship in a combat environment at that, you're going to have challenges with mental health. You're going to have issues with food. You're going to have issues with sailors being frustrated because they've been gone for a long time. I think the part we need to highlight on here is that, number one, these sailors have been at sea for quite some time and haven't had any kind of shore leave. Number two, the base where they were getting a lot of their supplies from had been hit earlier, according to some open source media reports, and they've been relying on stuff from Diego Garcia, which is much further away. So what I want to highlight is that the George Washington going as part of a normal rotation. People's families being upset is a normal thing, but when I really look at overall the morale of the troops, soldiers and sailors understand that they're currently in a fight and this is what they signed up for. It's also imperative that the Pentagon understand that you have to do normal rotations at some point to be able to move in fresh people and to give relief to those others. And so what we have going on is a normal rotation. And I think what we'll see is that George Washington will learn lessons from the Abraham Lincoln to try to make sure that the same things that are occurring now don't occur in the future.
Thank you to both our guests for sharing that. Please do stay with us as we are staying on this. Iran is blaming the United States and Israel for the instability of the Strait of Hormuz, with Tehran saying the waterway was open and stable until the February 28 military actions. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Esmail Baghei has said the subsequent military activity, including actions involving the strait and nearby areas, has contributed to the current security concerns. Baghei has rejected claims that Iran is responsible for creating instability in the strait. He said Iran, as a coastal state, has the right to take measures it considers necessary to protect its interests and national security. His comments come as shipping and security concerns continue to surround one of the world's most important energy routes. The Iranian spokesperson also criticized the U.S. over its reported naval blockade of Iran, while he said Washington's public discussion of the blockade amounts to an admission of aggression. He argued that such actions, along with what Iran describes as other violations of the Memorandum of Understanding to end the war, makes it difficult to establish security in the strait. The U.S. and Israel have not accepted Iran's account of the developments. The Strait of Hormuz remains a key flashpoint. For now, Iran's latest statements show that security around the waterway remains closely linked to the wider confrontation between Tehran, Washington, and Israel. Now let's hear the remarks made by Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Esmail Baghei.
وضعیت ناامنی در تنگه هرمز منحصراً نتیجه اقدام غیرقانونی آمریکا و رژیم صهیونیستی در سطح بین‌المللی خیلی وقتها به نحوی موضوع رو مطرح میکنن، القا میکنن که گویا این ایران هست که باعث ناامنی در تنگه هرمز شده. همه ما میدونیم که تنگه هرمز تا قبل از 9 اسفند 404 هیچ مشکلی نداشت، باز بود. سوء استفاده آمریکا و رژیم صهیونیستی از این آبراه برای حمله به ایران و همینطور سوء استفاده از مناطق مجاور کرانه جنوبی خلیج فارس برای طراحی و تدارک حمله علیه ایران باعث شد که تنگه ناامن بشه. ایران محق بود و هست که برای صیانت از منافع و امنیت ملی خودش مجموعه تدابیر رو اتخاذ بکنه به عنوان دولت ساحل.
Now, welcome back our both guests. First, I'd like to go to Ambassador Ambrister for my question. Ambassador, moving forward, do you think that only less than 80 days now to midterm election, what is US's priority? Is it still the first things that they earlier mentioned about the nuclear issue, regime change, etc., or do you think that risk elimination strategy for US is on hold, or they have quitted because it seems like the focus remains Strait of Hormuz?
You're right, and the Secretary of State has said that that's the current focus right now, and that is the more doable of the issues. The really tough issue, as mentioned, is the nuclear issue. We don't know how much highly enriched uranium the Iranians have, but presumably it's enough to continue a nuclear program, and that's quite dangerous. So it's incumbent to have international atomic energy inspectors there to find out. That's not happening at the moment. So I think that issue could potentially be pushed off. The issue of regime change has not been front and center for quite a while. The one that is potentially possible to negotiate is the Strait. And as you mentioned, there's progress. I don't know if I'd call it landmark progress between Oman and Iran, but it's certainly a step in the right direction. But the bigger issues are the ones that are going to take quite a while to negotiate, if that's possible at all. And both sides are going to continue to exert pressure.
Yes, thank you for highlighting that. Coming back to you, Colonel Putnam, what's your take, and can US's endgame or plan until the midterm election consider risk management or be considered risk elimination?
The first thing I'd like to highlight is we don't really know what was agreed to between Oman and Iran. We haven't seen anything that I've noticed come out of Omani sources yet. And we should remember it's a technical agreement. Iran has already said that it's not going to open up the Strait of Hormuz because of this. And we don't know what the other Gulf Arab states are going to say about it either. And the U.S. has red lines. So if Iran says, hey, we're going to charge tolls, that's going to be a red line. I think going forward, we have to understand that what the United States is currently practicing is coercive diplomacy through using economic means and military operations. Military operations are designed to not only create space for a political negotiation, but they're also designed to change our adversary's strategy. And right now, neither Tehran or Washington has been able to change each other's strategy through military operations. While the U.S. uses vertical pressure and escalation, think of it as like a volume on a remote control that goes up or down to try to increase pressure. Iran's engaging in horizontal escalation and horizontal pressure where it seeks to spread everything out across the entire region, using proxies in Iraq, the Houthis, Hezbollah, taking a look at what we've seen in the Strait of Hormuz, being able to target the Gulf Arab states when they're doing reprisals against U.S. operations. So I think the thing that we need to understand going forward is that everything is about gaining leverage for political negotiations. The concern that I'd have, and I was saying this last week on another channel, is that Iran's rhetoric has been so maximalist, and their demands are as well. And I've noticed that a lot of Iranian guests that I've been on shows with keep saying the U.S. is defeated. They keep saying they've won. And I think they're in danger of overplaying their hand and not understanding that if we compare this to a chess game, we're currently in the middle game, we're not in the end game. And if Iran wants to keep saying with this maximalist rhetoric, we've won, I think they're missing the point that they may have leverage, but they have to be able to turn that leverage into some type of strategic victory. So here's my last line. Tactical and operational success doesn't always transition to strategic victory, no matter which side it is.
Thank you for sharing that, Colonel. Coming back to you, Ambassador, building on Colonel Putnam's answer, does gaining leverage for political negotiations, whatever was achieved for both sides in MOU, what do you think that reflected overall, and the effectiveness of that as we see it coming to an end tomorrow without any, thing aligned for the next?
It tamped down the temperature to a certain degree. I think it's not been as kinetic, certainly, as it could have been over these past few weeks. There have been incidents back and forth, tit-for-tat retaliations, but it's not been all-out war. So that MOU has provided some space. But as we get closer to elections here, as gas prices go up, the pressure is going to continue to go up on the president. And questions like compensation, Iran asking for compensation for war damages, that's probably a non-starter. So there are just so many issues that have been thrown into the mix that are not resolved and are far from being resolved. So it's difficult to see that we've got much to grasp in terms of optimism in the next couple of months.
building on that, coming back to you, Colonel Putnam, also building on your earlier answer, do you think that there were any things left unturned from the last MOU signing that we might see it differently as we approach, midterm elections? It's much more closer. There's no time to do 60 days of MOU because there's just less than 80 days left for that. What do you think is still left unturned?
I think we might want to rotate the angle we're looking at this from. I don't think we can look at this as there has to be a deal before the midterms. I don't think there has to be any kind of deal before the midterms. And I know that maybe some people in the Republican Party would like that, but it's quite possible that President Trump and his administration have come to the realization that Iran is trying to slow roll them because of that. So it's quite possible that Washington may say, we don't have to make a deal. Listen, military operations like a naval blockade are not measured in days and weeks. They're measured in months and sometimes even longer. So that's one thing that we have to understand. Second, with the MOU, we have to remember that's Iran's baseline. And what was Iran supposed to get in that? They were going to get sanctions relief. They were going to get access to frozen assets. Okay. And they were supposed to get about $315 billion, I want to say, in some type of reparation fund that nobody knew who was paying for that. So that's their baseline. But Iranian guests, when they're going on television and debating the MOU, they want to say something that's very interesting. They say President Trump broke the MOU. And one of the things that I like to highlight in that is that the U.S. didn't fire on civilian tankers in the Strait of Hormuz once an agreement had been reached. There are peaceful ways, as I know the ambassador would agree with, that two sides can talk about this and try to be able to eliminate that issue. And so, the Iranians constantly say that the MOU was broken and that the U.S. didn't follow it, but they forget that they were firing on civilian tankers that couldn't defend themselves. The second thing they've been saying is the MOU it wasn't a ceasefire, it was an end of war. I think the MOU and those negotiations were rushed. I think there was a lot of ambiguity on both sides, like we saw with Article 5. We saw it more as a ceasefire, working our way to negotiations that would also include the nuclear issue, as the ambassadors brought up. My concern is a lot of the diplomatic oxygen is going to the Strait of Hormuz, and it's going to be very difficult to work on the nuclear issue. But to finish off what I'm saying is I think we need to move away from the premise that a deal has to be done by the midterms, because it doesn't. And I think the administration is understanding that if it wants to be able to reduce Iran's leverage, it's going to have to be patient and redirect Iran's pressure back to it.
Thank you very much for that interesting intake to both of you. Please do stay with us as we're moving the focus onto Russia and Ukraine now. Now, several explosions have rocked Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, early this morning amid a ballistic missile warning. Kyiv's mayor, Vitaly Klitschko, has confirmed this attack, reporting that falling debris caused fires in a northern suburb and south of the Kyiv, leaving at least one person injured. Military authorities have urged residents to seek shelter immediately as air defenses responded to the threat. Meanwhile, Russian forces reportedly downed 28 drones targeting Moscow in recent hours. This escalation coincides with deepening diplomatic and military ties between Moscow and Pyongyang. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un recently expressed pride in bilateral relations with Russian President Vladimir Putin, praising cooperation in a commemorative letter marking North Korea's liberation from Japanese colonial rule. President Putin has responded by describing relations as an unprecedentedly high level of comprehensive strategic partnership, as Ukrainian officials continue to condemn the use of North Korean ballistic missiles in Russian strikes against Ukrainian cities, highlighting the growing transnational dimension of the ongoing conflict. Now we welcome back both our guests, Ambassador Tom Armbruster. He joins us live from New York. First, I'd like to go back to Ambassador. Ambassador, just connecting what was said in our earlier discussion, the military escalation is for gaining leverage for political negotiation, quoted by Colonel Putnam. Do you think that is also the case for the escalations that we are continuing to see, especially this week? We saw so many attacks on Black Sea, as well as some aerial attacks, accidental ones allegedly, towards East Front in European skies, NATO skies as well. Where is this heading then?
What I'm seeing on the diplomatic side is a push by President Zelensky to expand his outreach to Europe and to really try to rally the European countries to his side to the extent that he can get them to supply military equipment, the things that they need for protection of the cities. But I think he's really trying to involve Europe much more fully in his effort, both in terms of defense and offense. As far as the military calculations, I would defer to Colonel Putnam on that, but I think it's telling that President Zelensky is not looking to Washington so much right now, but he is looking to the other NATO countries.
Thank you for highlighting that. And building on that, coming back to you, Colonel Putnam, last week we saw these escalations, as well as, reports coming out of saying that just what I read as well about North Korea's ammunitions, etc., being highly used or involved in Russia's war efforts towards Ukraine. How dangerous is this, and can anything be done to put a brake on the cooperation that we're seeing between North Korea and Russia?
First, I would just say that the situation's been dangerous since it started back in February of 2022, and it's only escalated. I mean, we're looking at something where I believe there's some open source reporting that says the Russians are losing killed and wounded around 30,000 soldiers a month, killed and wounded. And we know the Ukrainians are losing a lot of people too, although not nearly as much as the Russians. So when we talk about North Korean assistance to Russia, they're allies. And the U.S. has allies, and we work with our allies, just like Russia works with its allies. So it shouldn't be a surprise that North Korea is willing to work with Russia on this. What does North Korea get in exchange? They get access to technology. Their soldiers are actually having access now to fighting. And let me tell you, there's one thing when you have a military that's never been in a conflict. You can read up, you can study, you can train, but sometimes you got to go and actually learn the lessons. That's one thing the North Koreans are getting out of this. They're getting battle experience, and it helps the Russians because they have manpower issues. North Koreans also probably are getting some money. They're getting access to technology. But the point I want to highlight when you were asking about the escalation, we've seen an escalation, but it's been ongoing. Russia is trying to increase the pressure vertically on the Ukraine, okay? And that's also because they understand that interceptors are low. But the Ukraine is trying to take the fight to Russia inside Russia because they understand that Putin never wanted to be able to have his population feel affected by this conflict, and it now is, by targeting oil refineries, oil depots, wanting to bring the pressure to the population so they feel the war, and also undermining Russia's ability to finance it through their energy exports. So when you ask, where are we going with this? The answer really is we're not ready for a deal, because even though the Ukraine would like to negotiate, President Putin is doing everything he can to try to achieve his goals of securing the Donbass. And I don't see him willing to make any compromises. And I think he's going to continue to push because he believes he can wear down the West and the will of the West to be able to support the Ukraine, and he's going to get the deal that he wants. And then lastly, one thing I'd like to highlight, this applies for Iran and Strait of Hormuz and also the Ukraine. It's one thing to announce that negotiation starts. It's a second thing to say we've reached a framework. But the hardest part, as we saw with the MOU and the Strait of Hormuz, is actually implementing and executing the deal. So I think that's an important thing for everybody to remember.
Indeed. I learned a lot from both of you. Thank you very much, Ambassador Armbruster, as well as Colonel Putnam, for joining us today and sharing that insight throughout our news. Thank you very much. Now we turn to South America, Colombia, where survivors and local volunteers, as well as emergency crews in Cali, have united in a massive grassroots effort to clear the heavy debris and begin restoring their shattered neighborhoods following this week's devastating Monday's 7.4 magnitude earthquake. days after the powerful tremor flattened entire blocks, damaged critical infrastructure, and left hundreds of people dead. Communities have refused to wait for heavy machinery alone. Residents, students, local volunteers have formed human chains, passing buckets of broken concrete and rubble by hand, while working side by side with professional rescue teams as well as military personnel. Though official operations have increasingly shifted towards stabilization and humanitarian aid delivery, the collective display of solidarity across Cali's hardest hit sectors highlights an extraordinary resilience. Locals are determined to clear the wreckage, salvage what remains of their homes, and bring the long process of rebuilding their city from the ground up. While Colombia's new president has called on U.S. President Donald Trump to suspend tariffs targeting Colombia, which is reeling from the earthquakes. Now let's listen into how the locals are dealing with the aftermath of the deadly earthquake.
Después de 2 minutos de estar en el templo, más o menos, comenzó el terremoto. Entonces, lo que hicimos fue meter a algunas personas debajo de los bancos. Yo me metí con ellas debajo de unos bancos, mirando hacia mí para indicarles en qué momento teníamos que salir. Logramos, pues, que cuando terminó el terremoto sacarlas, pero luego caímos en cuenta que habían 3 personas arriba en el altar y entre los vecinos del sector nos ayudaron a sacar.
Vamos a entrar en una etapa de recuperación y de restauración. Estamos atravesando un duelo que nos embarga a todos. Sin embargo, esta situación nos ha hecho sacar más fuerza y nos ha hecho demostrarle al mundo, a Colombia, que por eso Cali es la sucursal del cielo. Cali, la capital pacífica de Colombia, y Cali somos todos. Esa es nuestra actividad, una actividad de limpieza, de recolección de escombros, porque aunque atravesamos una tragedia, esta tragedia nos va a unir.
That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.